That awesome. That the God of angel armies is always by our side. He goes before us. He stands behind. He is there. Whom shall I fear? And what an amazing thing to hear as we go to Revelation today. But before we dive into Revelation chapter 2, a question to ask. Is persecution good for the church? Is persecution good for the church? On one hand, I would quickly say, no, I don't want to be persecuted. I mean, what do? We often pray, God, deliver me, God, remove this, God, save me, God, help me, all of that. I know as a person, I don't want to be persecuted. I know as a pastor, I don't want our church to face severe persecution. But listen to what God has to say from the Scriptures. 1 Peter 5:10. This is from the King James. But the God of all grace, who hath called us unto his eternal glory by Jesus Christ, that after ye have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle you. Romans 4. So we went from Peter to Paul. Romans 5, 3 through 4. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance producing character, and character produces hope. And he goes on to say that hope will not disappoint us. So Peter, Paul, and even James. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete and lacking nothing. Persecution good for the church? God is very active through it. God is forming you. I love the word that picked up from the King James from the Peter passage, and James picks it up here from the ESV, that you will be made perfect. You will be made perfect through this suffering, through these trials, through these temptations, that God is not leaving you abandoned, but he's working in the situations. He's bringing about perseverance. He's bringing about hope as he does this. And of course, that's huge. That's huge as we see this small church, the church at Smyrna, the second of the 7 letters. And these are, as we talked about last time, 7 real-life churches. History, pastors, people, events, all happening. And just to kind of go back to the little map that we looked at last time, we looked at, Patmos in the sea. John is on the island of Patmos. Why? Because he preached Jesus, been exiled. And the first letter went to Ephesus, and about 35 miles from Ephesus to a little to the northwest is the town of Smyrna. It's the town of Smyrna. And then, of course, we'll go around it. I actually read something that it said that it's actually the ancient postal route that started at Ephesus, went to Smyrna, Pergamum, Tyre, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And then, of course, that's the way they're laid out in the book of Revelation as well. But here is a small, persecuted church. I think if you read all 7 letters together and asked which church is the most persecuted, it would be easy to say Smyrna. Smyrna. Why? Why Smyrna? Well, out of the 7 letters, 5 of them have pretty harsh condemnations. What did we hear last week? Ephesus. What was Ephesus' deal? Ephesus' deal. They had left their first love. You have left your first love. They had a cooling of what they used to do. They didn't have that same fire burning that they once had. How does that translate? Well, if they're not on fire like they were before, if they weren't out preaching and proclaiming Jesus as they go, they probably weren't persecuted as much. As we'll go forward and we'll see other churches, their issue is they look a lot like the world. No one's going to persecute someone that looks just like you. No one's going to persecute someone who does the same things you do. You're just like them. But Smyrna was faithful. Smyrna was faithful. And out of the letters, here is one who didn't receive a harsh condemnation. What did we hear last week? But I have this against you. We don't have that in this letter. We don't have that. And to the angel of the church of Smyrna write the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. And remember that these are Jesus' words. Red letter Bibles have this in red, that this is not John writing as a pastor, but these are Jesus' words. And all of these introductions connect us back to chapter 1. And that great vision that John had of the high and exalted Jesus, the one who appeared to be like a son of man. He's still in flesh, but the glory of God is coming forth through him so much that it says he looks like a son of man. You know, it's so there. And all of these tie back as these introductions. Last week it was I am the one who holds the 7 angels in my palm, and I walk among the lampstands. Today, the first and the last who died and came to life. The first and the last. He is, as I was talking to the children, he is the eternal God. Before this world was spoken into existence, Jesus was. And as Peter talks about as this world that we know is burned by fire and refined, there he will be all the way to the end, which really is no end, as it's eternal. He is there. He's saying, I've been there. But not just that, not just the eternal God, it also connects Jesus to the Father. Because throughout the Old Testament, the Father, Yahweh, is called the first and the last. Isaiah 41:4. Who has performed and done this, calling the generations from the beginning? I, the Lord, the first and the last am he. And the Lord equals Yahweh there. We see that again in Isaiah 43, 44, and 48. And so not only is he eternal, but he is connected to the Father. That the Father and the Son are one. It's not that one came after the other, as we would think of Father and Son, but they are equal. But he doesn't stop there either, does he? He who died and came to life. He who died and came to life. And you think about eternal God, how does that happen? It's only in the incarnation. That Jesus came and he took on flesh, and in that flesh, Jesus, God, died. But he came to life. And that's the great message that we're still proclaiming today. We haven't done it yet today, so let's do it again. Christ has risen. He has risen indeed. Hallelujah. That's the message. So why this introduction to the church at Smyrna? Because they're suffering great persecution. Because they're being beat down. They're losing their lives. They're dying. They have nothing. It says they are poor. And Jesus is saying, I've been there. I'm eternal. And even more than that, I know what you're going through. I've died and come back to life. And I've come back to life, as I told the kids, I'm bigger than all of this. I am bigger than all of your issues. And because you believe in me, you will overcome them just as I have. Smyrna. Unlike Ephesus was kind of easy to talk about history because we could go to Acts. We could go to Acts 18 and 19 and read a lot about how the church at Ephesus started, how Paul and Apollos and Aquila and Priscilla and even go to Timothy as Paul is writing to Timothy to say, here is what it's about. We don't have one reference of Smyrna in the Bible except for this revelation. We don't know a whole lot. We don't know a whole lot, but we can go to history and kind of put the pieces together. The one thing that we can say probably happened, or the foundations of Smyrna, comes from those verses from Acts 19, where Paul was in Ephesus. And after he had been kind of removed from the synagogue, he goes to the hall of Tyrannus, and he preaches there for 2 years. And it says, during that 2 years, all of Asia Minor heard about Jesus. So it's probably sometime in those 2 years of Paul in Ephesus that Smyrna was founded. Whether it be people from Smyrna came and went back, or whether Paul had minor missionary journeys into these towns all around preaching, I don't know, but that was probably the start. Smyrna. It's not a word that we hear except for this one time in Revelation. It's not a word used in Acts. Probably not a word that you have ever used in any sentence outside of maybe studying the word or the town of Smyrna. But if you actually take those letters and put them into the Greek and go to the Greek dictionary, you'll find that you do know the word. That word Smyrna means myrrh. It means myrrh. And so when you look at the text and you actually read the Greek text, when the wise men came, they came and they gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which is kind of interesting. Because myrrh is an ointment that comes from a very thorny bush. It was given as a perfume. Jesus was given gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Of course, we believe that those kind of point to who he is, the gold, and the frankincense king, all of that. And then myrrh was also used as a burial spice. And so we have that kind of play out. But then it's also used as a sedative. In Mark, it talks about they dipped the branch into a wine mixed with Smyrna, myrrh. As a sedative, Jesus said it's all finished, it's complete, it's done. He thirsts, and they gave him this, and it probably numbed him of the pain a little bit after it was finished. But then, of course, in the burial, we have this again, myrrh. They wrapped him in cloths and prepared his body with myrrh. And I think that's interesting, because here the plant has to be crushed to get forth that fragrance. And here we have this small, tiny church, poor, beaten, dying for their faith, and yet it's a wonderful fragrance to Jesus. A wonderful fragrance as it is crushed, but yet is faithful. What does Paul say? We are crushed, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We are more than conquerors because of Christ. Because of Christ. Smyrna. Smyrna was a beautiful city. You can kind of see some of the pictures of the ruins on the slide, but it was a beautiful city. Last time we said Ephesus was the light of Asia. Smyrna was the crown of Asia. The crown of Asia. It was built on a harbor. Again, another beautiful harbor, just like Ephesus back in the day. Now that's filled in. But Smyrna was a beautiful harbor, beautiful architecture. It was built on kind of foothills going up to the mountains. It was built with water around it, and there was a big mountain, the Pagos, but behind it that had all the temples on it. We'll talk more about that later. A beautiful city. It was a free city, just like Ephesus. Rome didn't send soldiers. They were on the right side of every Roman civil war. And so they were free. But there was one issue. There was one issue with this city. That when the architect laid out the city, he forgot one thing. He forgot drains. And so here's this beautiful city, but in the rainy season, the streets smelled and flowed like sewers. Tie that in with myrrh, the church being persecuted. Theologically, the city stinks, and we'll talk more about that theologically, but yet this church is myrrh. The church. So what does Jesus say to this church? I know your afflictions, your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. I know the trials, I know the tribulations, I know the persecutions, and not just a mental thing. Here is the one who died and came to life. I know them because I've been there. I've done this. And they are struggling greatly. And they're struggling from many different ways, or at least three major ones. And first is the Romans. At this time, the Caesar was Domitian. Domitian was a wicked man, a one that sent out wave after wave of persecution on the Christians, and it seemed like it would reach a fever pitch right here at Smyrna. And they were dying. There was probably mass executions of Christians at times. There was a temple, the Dia Romana. This was the first place that actually built a temple to Rome itself, that Rome was a goddess. And there was a temple there for later Caesars, and even the Senate got its own temple. And so if you didn't follow Rome, you were an outsider. You had to go more than once a year and burn incense and offer sacrifices at Caesar's temple. And you kind of got a little punch card. I did it. And you would carry that around. And if you didn't have that little card, that little receipt that you did this, it could mean death. It could mean death. It says you are poor. Or I know your poverty. Other translation says you are poor. If you didn't have this card, you didn't find work. They could steal your stuff. They could take it from you. And so here are these Christians that would not say Caesar is Lord. Why? Because they say Jesus is Lord. But they're losing everything. They are losing everything because of the Roman persecutions. But it wasn't just the Romans. There were temples to all kinds of gods. And the Christians at this time were actually called atheists because they didn't believe in all the other gods. They didn't believe in Apollo and Zeus and Aphrodite, and there was even a temple for Homer there because he was born there, and all of these other gods. And so they were persecuted by them. But maybe some of the greatest persecution comes from the Jews. The Jews hated the Christians. They believed that they had the right claim to Abraham. And here it says, I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not. I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews. What is blasphemy? To speak out against. Jesus was accused of blasphemy because he said he was God. He said he was God, and therefore it was blasphemy in the eyes of the Jews. Well, here the Jews are saying Jesus isn't Lord. He isn't God. And so it's blasphemy in the eyes of God, and they are persecuting them. And how does Jesus feel about this? How does Jesus kind of, label the Jews? A synagogue of Satan. No better than the temple to Zeus or the temple to Rome or any of that. They are a synagogue of Satan, and they are oppressing the church. This is real. This was real. It said there were at least 12 major pastors through the history of this church that were persecuted. Polycarp, maybe you've heard of him, a pretty well-known name, was martyred. And just to show you the persecution, I want to read his account. To illustrate, the persecution, here's a historical name that you must remember. To illustrate the hatred of the Christians in Smyrna, history has left us the details of the death of Polycarp. Polycarp knew John. Polycarp worked with John in the churches of Asia Minor. Polycarp was the pastor of the church, historians tell us, at Smyrna. Polycarp was murdered in 155 AD at the age of 86. Here's the account. In a letter addressed to the church at Smyrna, to the churches in the Christian world, it is related that Jews joined with the heathens in clamoring for Polycarp. And the Christian leader at Smyrna should be cast to the lions or burned alive. And we're foremost in bringing the logs for the fire, in the endeavor to prevent the remains of the martyr being delivered to the Christian friends for burial. It was the time of the public games. The city was crowded. The crowds were excited. Suddenly, the shout went up, "Away with the atheist! Let Polycarp be searched for." No doubt, says the historian, Polycarp could have escaped, but already he had a dream which he saw a pillow under his head burning with fire. He had awakened to tell his disciples, "I will be burned alive." His whereabouts were betrayed to the persecutors by a slave girl who collapsed under torture. They came to arrest him. Not even the soldier captain wished to see Polycarp die. On their brief journey to the city, he pleaded with the man. "What harm is it," he said, "to say Caesar is Lord and to offer sacrifice and save your life?" But Polycarp was adamant. For him, only Jesus was Lord. He entered the arena. The proconsul gave him a choice of cursing the name of Christ and making sacrifice to Caesar or death. His famous words were these: 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? The proconsul then threatened him with burning. Polycarp replied, "You threaten me with fire that burns a time and is quickly quenched, for you do not know the fire that awaits the wicked in the judgment to come and the everlasting punishment. Why are you waiting? Come do what you will." He remained unmoved. So the crowds came flocking with sticks and from the workshops, from the baths, and even the Jews, although they were breaking the Sabbath law by carrying such burdens, were foremost in the clamor and bringing wood for the fire. They were going to bind him to the stake. He says, "Leave me as I am," Polycarp said. "For he who gives me the power to endure the fire will grant me to remain in the flames unmoved, even without the security you will give by the binding." So they left him loosely bound in the flames. There he died for his Christ. There's another account that actually said that they looked upon him as the fire is going up and burning him, and he was too much at peace. Somebody took out a knife and ran it through his heart so that it would be over, because he was at peace, dying for his Lord. This is what he says. Jesus, do not be afraid of what you're about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you. You will suffer persecution for 2 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at the second death. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And I guess I have to say this, that some commentaries actually take this as a little bit of a warning because they are fearing. I take it more as encouragement. Take it either way. Be not afraid. Do not be afraid, for you are about to suffer. The devil's going to come, and we don't know exactly what this 10 days is. Is it, for 10 days they'll be thrown in prison? For 10 days the whole Christian church will be, put in prison? Or 10 days, and I'll take it this way, more symbolic of a time frame of persecution. And of course, if this is written towards the end, 90 A.D., Polycarp isn't killed till 155 A.D. A time frame of persecution. A time frame. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. Be faithful even unto death, and you will receive the crown of life. What is the crown of life? The crown that is life. Eternal life. God comes to give you life. Remain faithful. Remain faithful. If you have ears, listen to these stories. Remain faithful. He is the first and the last, the one who has died and has come to life. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. What is the second death? It's not the grave. It's hell. And the one who believes will not be thrown in hell for all eternity. We read from 1 John. How do you overcome the world? You overcome the world by faith. Faith in Jesus. Remain faithful. Remain faithful. It's interesting. We talked about Ephesus last time, and what was the warning to Ephesus? If you do not repent, remember your ways of old and do them again, I'm going to remove the golden lampstand from you, which is the church. I'm going to shut you down. And we can go to Ephesus now, and it's rubble. It's rubble. You go to Turkey, and you go to, I believe they call the area Kusadasi. There is nothing. It's a ways before even the first town. God removed their lampstand. But here he says, do not be afraid, and you'll receive the victor's crown. You can go to modern-day Turkey. Izmir is the place. Izmir, and the Christians there are still being persecuted, not by the Romans or the pagan worship or even the Jews, but by Muslims. But they're remaining faithful. I found on a website that there's about 250 churches still in Izmir today. He who has ears, let him hear. This word isn't just for them, this is for us. Whatever persecution, whatever trial, whatever temptation, whatever issue you might have, be faithful. Why? Because we have a God who is the first and the last, who has died and come to life. Amen. Now may the peace that passes all understanding guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Amen. Let us stand and profess.